Think you know Hollywood legends? Think again. Behind the glitz, the glamour, and those unforgettable faces, there's a different kind of fiction running through Tinseltown. One where the stars themselves were carefully manufactured, polished, and sold to the public like luxury products. Ever wondered if your favorite icon was more myth than reality? Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of old Hollywood illusion to reveal 19 classic stars who were, quite literally, studio inventions. Ready to see just how far the magic trick really went? Rita Hworth. Rita Hworth is the poster child for old Hollywood reinvention, a living, breathing masterclass in transformation. But the real story of how Margarita Carmen Cancino became Rita Hworth is less Cinderella and more mad scientist. Picture a shy Spanish-speaking teenager with a hairline too low for studio bosses, a last name that sounded too ethnic, and a look that didn't fit the American pinup fantasy. What happened next wasn't just an image makeover. It was a full-on rebranding operation. Columbia Pictures didn't just give her a new name. They yanked back her hairline with painful electrolysis sessions, dyed her dark hair that famous coppery red, and sent her to diction coaches to erase any hint of her Spanish roots. Margarita Cancino was airbrushed out of existence, replaced with the all-American goddess Hollywood craved. Studio execs didn't even try to hide it. Rita later said, "They went to work on me like I was a product. I was their guinea pig." But the story doesn't stop at the surface. Rita's new persona came with a script. Demure, mysterious, exotic, but only just enough. The reality: she hated interviews, dodged the press, and struggled with an identity crisis. Her glamour was work, not inheritance. She once confessed that, under all the dye and dazzle, "I always felt like Margarita, never Rita." The punchline: the very traits that made her famous, the bombshell looks, the pin-up image, that name, were artificial from root to tip. When you watched Hworth light up the screen, you witnessed a miracle of image engineering, not nature. Rita Hworth wasn't just a star. She was the ultimate studio invention, built piece by piece, and the world fell for it. Rock Hudson. If the Golden Age had a human embodiment of the perfect man, it was Rock Hudson. Chiseled jaw, perfect smile, and a name that sounded like a superhero, Rock Hudson was America's dreamboat. But Roy Scherer Jr., the man behind the myth, would have been utterly unrecognizable to fans before Hollywood got to him. What you saw on screen was a full-blown creation, down to the last detail, crafted with surgical precision by Universal's publicity machine. First, that name, Roy Scherer, didn't have enough sizzle, so the studio picked Rock Hudson, a moniker as artificial as a spray tan, meant to evoke strength and American grandeur. Then came the transformation. Teeth fixed, voice lowered, wardrobe overhauled, rough edges sanded smooth. Acting lessons, posture coaching, and hours in front of mirrors. Every bit of Rock was carefully constructed. If Roy's real life didn't fit the narrative, Universal simply invented a better one, fabricating a biography as glossy as any Technicolor musical. But the biggest fiction of all, the straight arrow, lady killer persona. While Rock Hudson was packed off to endless publicity dates with starlets and posed in photo ops as the ideal family man, his real private life was a secret guarded like Fort Knox. Agents and studio execs squashed rumors, paid off gossip columnists, and kept his relationships off the record at any cost. His romantic life wasn't just off limits, it was rewritten entirely, replaced by a string of studio-arranged romances, and a marriage that was all for show. Rock Hudson's story is Hollywood smoke and mirrors at its finest. He played the part so well that, for decades, even the press didn't question the legend. But peel back the celluloid, and you find a man whose entire career was built on fiction. The world wanted a fantasy. Hollywood delivered it, and nobody did it better than Rock. In the end, the icon was as much a studio creation as any movie monster, designed to be worshipped, but never truly known. Joan Crawford. Few stars symbolize self-invention like Joan Crawford. Her legend reads like a bootstraps fairy tale. Born Lucille LeSueur in poverty, she scrapped her way from small-town obscurity to Hollywood royalty. But the real magic trick wasn't her rise. It was the elaborate persona MGM crafted from the raw material. Crawford's transformation is less about acting and more about the relentless sculpting of a myth, right down to her very name, which was chosen by a magazine contest because Le Sueur sounded too much like sewer for Louis B. Mayer's taste. The studio's work didn't stop with a name. Crawford's natural accent was neutralized through rigorous diction lessons. She received coaching in manners, fashion, and high society small talk, a crash course in how to seem sophisticated even if you weren't. Studio trainers taught her which fork to use, which books to display and be photographed with, and even which composers to praise at dinner parties. Crawford reportedly kept note cards with references to art, literature, and opera, rehearsing them for interviews like lines in a script. Her physical transformation was equally methodical. Dance lessons gave her that signature posture. Makeup artists and photographers learned how to harden or soften her look, depending on the year's beauty trends. MGM stylists took a girl with a tough edge and polished her into the queen of glamour, never mind that she sometimes felt like an imposter beneath all the polish. Yet the genius of Joan Crawford's studio invention is how she embraced and weaponized the myth. Crawford guarded her past fiercely, denying rumors about her childhood and playing the self-made sophisticate to the hilt. By the 1940s, she wasn't just acting on screen. She was living a role in every public appearance, every carefully curated quote, every photo op. The reality behind the legend. Underneath all that sophistication was a relentless survivor who learned early that Hollywood rewarded those who could sell a good story, especially when the story was herself. Carrie Grant. Everybody wants to be Carrie Grant. Even I want to be Carrie Grant. That iconic quote from the man himself says it all. Born Archibald Leach in the backstreets of Bristol, England, Grant's original life couldn't have been further from the suave, debonair persona he became. Raised amid hardship, with a father who vanished and a mother who was institutionalized, young Archie had little formal education and even less polish. The man we remember as the silver-tongued king of screwball comedy and sophisticated romance was a pure Hollywood fabrication, created, refined, and finally adopted by Grant himself. When he arrived in America, Grant was just another vaudeville performer, scrappy and eager, with a thick accent and a gangly frame. Hollywood saw potential, but not in Archie. His transformation began with voice lessons, posture training, and endless rehearsals in front of the mirror. Grant invented his own transatlantic accent, a mixture of British and American, that sounded educated, but wasn't tied to any real place. He kept vocabulary flashcards and annotated scripts phonetically to master difficult words, determined never to trip up in interviews. But perhaps the greatest illusion was the effortless elegance. Grant's image of the sophisticated playboy was as manufactured as any MGM musical set. Behind the charm was a man obsessed with self-improvement, even practicing casual gestures and one-liners in the mirror for hours. He avoided conversations about literature or high art unless he'd prepped with a crib sheet. Grant openly admitted his persona was a performance. I pretended to be someone I wanted to be, and finally, I became that person. Or he became me. In the end, Cary Grant's greatest role wasn't any film character, but Cary Grant himself, a masterpiece of Hollywood engineering and the world's favorite illusion. The real trick? He fooled not just his fans, but himself. Greta Garbo. I want to be alone. With that one line, Greta Garbo sealed her legend as Hollywood's most mysterious enigma. But the Garbo mystique, the aloofness, the deep silence, the haunting stare, wasn't a quirk of personality. It was an act, rehearsed and reinforced by a studio system that understood the value of an unreadable face. Garbo's public persona was a perfect storm of myth-making, language barriers, and plain old self-preservation, all spun into a web that audiences still haven't quite untangled. Born Greta Gustafsson in working-class Stockholm, Garbo had little formal education and, early on, struggled with English. MGM quickly realized her foreignness could be spun into mystique, and they encouraged her to say less. Let photographers catch her reading untranslated books and speak only when absolutely necessary. Her silence in interviews wasn't a sign of profound thought. It was mostly to avoid making grammatical mistakes. MGM even hired language coaches to help her navigate press events. But Garbo, wary and introverted, often just dodged the spotlight instead. Her famous apartment stacked with books? Many were props, with uncut pages, chosen to impress visitors and reinforce the idea of Garbo the deep thinker. Friends remembered her changing the subject whenever philosophy or literature came up, opting instead to retreat with a fashion magazine or make a wry joke to deflect attention. On set, she kept to herself, rarely engaging in banter, letting others project whatever image of intellectual or mystic suited their fantasies. What's truly fascinating is how Garbo's calculated silence became her superpower. She discovered, perhaps better than any star, that in Hollywood, mystery is its own kind of performance. The less you reveal, the more people fill in the blanks with their own dreams. Garbo, the deep enigma, was ultimately a character invented by necessity, one that turned awkwardness into legend and made an introverted Swedish girl the most enigmatic star on Earth. Marlene Dietrich. No one did self-mythology quite like Marlene Dietrich. If you think the German-born goddess simply showed up in Hollywood as a fully formed icon, think again. Marlene was the ultimate cinematic chameleon, a woman sculpted by director Josef von Sternberg, who took an ambitious Berlin nightclub singer and manufactured an icon out of shadow, seduction, and carefully curated legend. Dietrich's transformation was painstaking. Sternberg became her Pygmalion, dictating her every move, from how she tilted her chin to which side of her face caught the most light. The smoky eyes, the languid poses, the androgynous fashion, none of it was left to chance. He micromanaged her makeup, her wardrobe, and even her public statements. The idea was to create a living enigma, a woman who was both untouchable and irresistible, whose very accent was a marketing tool. When Dietrich arrived in Hollywood, she played up her European mystery, avoiding talk of her unremarkable youth in Germany. But the illusion didn't stop with Sternberg. Studio publicists concocted stories of wild bohemian nights, countless lovers, and philosophical musings. Dietrich herself became complicit, feeding reporters outrageous lines about her past and letting contradictions pile up. She would claim to be both a revolutionary and a recluse, a lover of both men and women, a poet, a patriot, and an unflappable cynic, all depending on the audience. Colleagues noticed the performance off-screen as much as on. She refused to be photographed without controlling the lighting. She'd rewrite interviews, demand retakes in real life, and even offered advice to other actresses about how to become mysterious. Never reveal your real age, your real feelings, or your real hair color. Marlene Dietrich wasn't just a studio creation. She was her own co-author. She blurred the lines between person and persona so thoroughly that even close friends sometimes questioned what was real. The result? A legend nobody could pin down, and a woman who proved that in Hollywood, sometimes the best story is the one nobody can verify. Norma Shearer. Before there was a Meryl or a Streep, there was Norma Shearer, MGM's ultimate first lady, a woman so synonymous with class that her very name sounded like a department store. But Shearer's climb from awkward Canadian teenager to Hollywood's queen of elegance wasn't the work of fate. It was a marathon of image engineering, executed by the most powerful studio machine on Earth. When Norma arrived in Hollywood, she was hardly leading lady material. Studio execs reportedly called her cross-eyed and ordinary, dismissing her looks as bland. But Norma wasn't just ambitious. She was relentless. She submitted herself to a battery of self-improvement, dental work, eye exercises, and the full MGM beauty boot camp. Then came the real reinvention. Louis B. Mayer's team taught her how to dress, speak, and even laugh in a way that signaled sophistication. She received etiquette lessons, coaching in posture, and even pointers on how to make serious faces for press photos. But the real genius behind Shearer's myth was the PR department. Studio publicists invented a background of genteel Canadian refinement and circulated stories about her supposed literary passions. Photographers were sent to catch her reading classics, and scripts were planted that allowed Shearer to spout philosophy and poetry. Even her marriage to MGM production chief Irving Thalberg was spun into legend. He was the boy genius, and she, the perfect muse. Norma leaned in. She rehearsed every public appearance like a scene in a film, knowing exactly which angle to show the press. When asked about politics or art, she responded with pre-written talking points and well-rehearsed lines. Off camera, friends said, she was down to earth, fond of card games and dirty jokes, not the regal empress depicted in magazines. Norma Shearer's sophistication was MGM's most successful illusion, a mask so convincing it became the gold standard for Hollywood reinvention. She wasn't born glamorous. She built it, brick by brick, and then let the world believe she'd always lived in a palace. Jean Harlo. If you ever wondered who invented the blonde bombshell, look no further than Jean Harlo, and, more importantly, the team of chemists, stylists, and spin doctors who created her. Born Harlan Carpenter in Kansas City, Jean was an unlikely candidate for sex symbol immortality. Her rise was nothing short of a science experiment, where every detail was engineered to manufacture desire and sell tickets. It started with the hair. Platinum Blonde wasn't just a nickname. It was a studio mandate, one that required weekly peroxide treatments so intense, Harlo's scalp reportedly bled. Her natural beauty was accentuated and sometimes obliterated with layers of makeup, skin-lightening creams, and carefully choreographed costumes designed to catch the light and ignite fantasies. MGM dictated her look down to the inch. The curve of her eyebrows, the line of her lips, the sparkle of her gowns. Harlo was forbidden to tan, required to maintain an extreme diet, and told exactly how to move, speak, and smile. Behind the scenes, studio publicists rewrote her history, playing down her Midwestern upbringing and emphasizing a more glamorous, big-city origin. She was paraded through Hollywood as the ultimate vamp, dangerous, unattainable, and unbothered by the real world. The press called her the blonde bombshell, and MGM ran with it, selling an image so extreme it bordered on caricature. But the real Jean Harlo was softer, funnier, and far more ordinary than her legend suggested. She loved corny jokes, doted on her mother, and felt self-conscious about her looks. Co-stars described her as friendly and unpretentious, a world away from the femme fatale the world saw on screen. In the end, Jean Harlo was a living contradiction. The sex symbol who wanted to be taken seriously, the homebody forced to be Hollywood's wildest party girl. The platinum blonde was pure invention, a shimmering illusion that hid a real, relatable woman underneath. Clark Gable. Clark Gable, the name alone conjures up images of rugged masculinity, effortless confidence, and the kind of swagger that made Rhett Butler unforgettable. But the man who became the king of Hollywood didn't waltz onto the MGM lot looking like a movie god. His rise is a tale of extreme reinvention, where almost every piece of Gable's persona was whittled, shaped, and polished to perfection by the studio system. If Hollywood could manufacture royalty, Clark Gable was Exhibit A. Born in blue-collar Ohio, Gable was missing most of the gloss audiences would later associate with him. He showed up in Los Angeles with crooked teeth, oversized ears, and an accent straight out of a steel mill. MGM's solution? Total overhaul. First, dental surgeons capped and straightened his teeth. Then doctors pinned back his ears. Acting coaches helped iron out the rough edges in his voice and mannerisms. Gable was drilled on how to hold a cigarette, sip a drink, and even how to stand, because a king should never slouch. The myth-making went deeper than the surface. Studio PR teams massaged his life story, downplaying the failed marriages, odd jobs, and years spent bouncing around low-rent theaters. Instead, they sold Gable as the all-American dream. A man of the people, rough but with hidden refinement. Photographers captured him in tuxedos and at polo matches, always just a little out of his element, but pulling it off with that signature grin. Gable himself played along, adopting the swagger MGM handed him. Off-screen, friends said he was shy, fond of hunting and cars, happiest in work shirts and jeans. But in front of a camera, he was pure confidence. The man every guy wanted to be and every woman wanted to tame. Gable's transformation wasn't a lie. It was a miracle of studio engineering, proof that Hollywood could take raw material and spin it into gold. He became the ultimate fantasy, not because he started that way, but because the studio never let anyone see the work behind the curtain. Ann Sheridan. Ann Sheridan wasn't supposed to be a star. She was supposed to be a secretary. But Hollywood loves an underdog. And, apparently, a catchy label. When Warner Brothers branded her as the Oomph Girl, it was part of an all-out campaign to create America's next sex symbol, with a personality that practically came with its own trademark. The reality was a lot messier. Born Clara Lou Sheridan in Texas, Ann had a tomboy streak a mile wide. She liked sports, cracked jokes, and had no patience for glamour. But when she won a bit part in a movie contest, the studio pounced. Out went Clara Lou, in came Ann, sleeker, more sophisticated, easier to plaster on a marquee. Then the real makeover began. Stylists worked on her hair, makeup, and wardrobe, teaching her how to transform her girl-next-door look into pin-up perfection. But Warner Brothers didn't stop there. They crafted an entire backstory, painting her as the embodiment of oomph, a word that meant everything and nothing, but certainly suggested sex appeal. Press releases oozed with stories about her irresistible magnetism, and photographers snapped endless cheesecake photos to sell the sizzle. Sheridan, ever the good sport, played along, at least in public. She gave witty interviews, posed for magazine spreads, and grinned through endless oomph questions. Privately, she rolled her eyes at the whole circus. Co-stars remembered her as quick with a wisecrack and more comfortable in slacks than evening gowns. Sheridan hated the label and said, "Oomph is just a sound. What the hell does it mean anyway?" But the image stuck, and for a few years, Ann Sheridan became a poster girl for a kind of movie magic that had nothing to do with reality. Ann Sheridan's legend is living proof that in the golden age, a good nickname and the right photo could create a star overnight, even if the woman behind the label never quite bought into her own myth. Tab Hunter. Tab Hunter's story reads like the ultimate Hollywood fairy tale, if you leave out the parts about control, secrecy, and carefully orchestrated fakery. Born Arthur Gellion, he was the epitome of California innocence, blonde, blue-eyed, and built like a beach movie dream. But the leap from unknown stable boy to heartthrob was anything but natural. Tab Hunter was a product of the system, name, persona, and all. Arthur's original claim to fame was his face, discovered at a horse show, and he was quickly scooped up by an agent with a sharp eye for the next big thing. But Arthur Gellion didn't exactly roll off the tongue. Enter the name machine. Tab Hunter, a creation engineered to be memorable, marketable, and just a little bit mysterious. The rest of his persona followed suit. Studio bosses sent him to acting coaches, speech therapists, and fitness trainers. Wardrobe departments selected every outfit, and publicists arranged dates with starlets. feeding the tabloid rumor mill. The big secret, of course, was that Tab Hunter was gay, a fact known to Hollywood insiders, but anathema to the carefully maintained image of the all-American boy. Agents and studio fixers went to extraordinary lengths to keep up appearances, even arranging a highly publicized and fake romance with Natalie Wood. Tab himself later described it as a movie set that never closed. Every handshake, every smile, every love scene on screen was monitored, analyzed, and shaped to fit the fantasy. But behind closed doors, the real Tab Hunter struggled with the loneliness of living a lie. He later wrote about the pressure to maintain a mask and the relief he felt when, decades later, he could finally tell his own story. Fans bought the dream for years, and why wouldn't they? The world loves beautiful illusions. Tab Hunter's greatest role wasn't in any teen drama or western. It was playing the perfect heartthrob, 24/7, for a studio that couldn't afford to let reality in. John Gilbert, silent-era superstar John Gilbert, didn't just play romantic legends, he was one. Or at least, that's the script Hollywood wrote for him. Dubbed the Great Lover by studio publicists, Gilbert's image was a glossy dream, smoldering eyes, poetic soul, and a reputation for breaking hearts both on and off screen. But the real John Gilbert was the product of relentless myth-making and a little desperation on the part of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Born John Pringle in rural Montana, Gilbert's earliest years were unremarkable. The future matinee idol bounced from odd jobs to walk-on roles, his looks and talent slowly attracting studio interest. Then, as silent film exploded, so did Gilbert's carefully constructed legend. MGM assigned him a handler to coach him in manners, fashion, and love letters. Yes, he practiced penning flowery lines in case fans ever saw his handwriting. Gossip columnists, paid and primed by the studio, printed stories of wild affairs, moonlit serenades, and epic duels for his affection. None of it was true. The invention only intensified after Gilbert's first box office hits. His love life became the stuff of serialized fiction. Any co-star he so much as glanced at was declared his next conquest. The press implied he wrote poetry by candlelight and debated philosophy at midnight, all while saving orphans and dueling rivals. In reality, he was shy, deeply insecure, and more likely to be found reading dime-store detective novels than reciting Keats. Friends said he'd often laugh at the rumors and wondered who was coming up with his supposed adventures. When sound arrived and Gilbert's career faltered, the studio's publicity machine worked overtime to salvage his myth, blaming technical quirks, jealous rivals, or even a secret cabal for his supposed voice problem. The truth? Gilbert's on-screen magic was always about image and suggestion, not substance. In the end, his greatest love affair was with a public that never saw the real man, only the legend written by committee and sold in flickering silver light. Lupe Velez. Lupe Velez was a walking headline, a studio invention so over the top that even her name became shorthand for fiery Latina. But beneath the explosive public persona, Velez was more than just a bundle of stereotypes. She was a skilled performer boxed in by the caricature Hollywood insisted she play. MGM and RKO promoted her as the Mexican Spitfire, peddling a version of ethnicity that was as manufactured as her movie's Technicolor backdrops. Born Maria Guadalupe Villalobos. Velez in San Luis Potosí, Mexico. Lupe's early years were ordinary, filled with family and dreams of stardom. When she arrived in Hollywood, executives spotted a goldmine. Her accent, her comic timing, her fearlessness in front of a camera. But rather than let her play a range of roles, studios locked her into one. The wild, passionate, unpredictable Latin bombshell who set rooms and leading men on fire. Publicists cranked out stories of on-set tantrums, wild romances, and impromptu fights. Velez was told to play up her temper for interviews, wear dramatic costumes, and flirt shamelessly with reporters. Magazine profiles painted her as a force of nature, never pausing to ask what she actually wanted from her career. Even her catchphrases, "Ay caramba" and "I kill you," were inventions tailored to fit the Hollywood stereotype. Friends recalled Velez privately complaining about always being the joke, never the leading lady with depth. What got lost in all the noise was Lupe's sharp mind, business sense, and ambition. She negotiated her own contracts, fought for better pay, and dreamed of producing films, far from the image of the crazy Spitfire Hollywood adored. Sadly, the industry's narrow vision left her little room to be anything else, and when tragedy struck, the press doubled down on myth over reality. Lupe Velez's legacy isn't just a story of studio invention. It's a cautionary tale about what gets sacrificed when Hollywood prefers stereotypes to the complexities of real women. She was more than a headline. She was a star, stifled by a system that only wanted her loudest act. Loretta Young. Loretta Young glided through the golden age draped in silks, innocence, and an air of untouchable grace. She was the embodiment of purity, on screen and off. Or so the story went. In reality, Loretta Young's virtuous persona was a fortress of studio spin, built to survive in a Hollywood that demanded not just talent, but an impossible brand of perfection. Born Gretchen Michaela Young to a devout Catholic family, Loretta entered show business as a child and never left. As she matured, studios seized on her wholesome looks and devout reputation, transforming her into Hollywood's patron saint. Press releases painted her as a model of morality, squeaky clean, family-oriented, a good girl in a world of scandal. The truth was more complicated. Young had affairs, including one with Clark Gable that resulted in a secret child, but the studio's PR army went into overdrive to protect her image. They concocted cover stories, whisked her away for a vacation during her pregnancy, and then arranged an elaborate adoption ruse to hide the child's true parentage. Every public appearance was choreographed. Loretta was coached on how to speak, how to dress, and how to answer awkward questions with a saintly smile. Photographers were only allowed to shoot her from her good side, and journalists who pried too deeply found themselves uninvited from studio events. She received fan mail by the ton, much of it written by the studio's own marketing team, to ensure the right image circulated. Even as she won an Oscar and became a TV trailblazer, Loretta's personal struggles remained locked behind the facade. Friends remembered her as funny, sharp, and worldly, a woman forced to act the part of angel every day. In the end, Loretta Young's public purity was a brilliant piece of performance art, designed by Hollywood and executed by a woman who knew the price of slipping up. Her story is proof that sometimes the halo is the heaviest thing a star can wear. Tyrone Power. For millions of moviegoers, Tyrone Power was the embodiment of dashing adventure, a romantic hero with perfect hair, Latin charm, and a family legacy to match. But much of what audiences knew about Tyrone Power was dreamed up in a studio office. Born into an acting family, yes, but not the blue-blooded royalty that press agents described. The real Tyrone Power was less Errol Flynn, the more everyman, shaped, polished, and sent into the world as a fantasy that even he sometimes struggled to recognize. When Power landed at 20th Century Fox, executives wasted no time in building his image. They accentuated his exotic looks, leaning into family tales of Spanish ancestry and creating a narrative of international mystique. His love life was curated for headlines, with romances manufactured as much by the studio as by Power himself. Publicists worked overtime to present him as Hollywood's most eligible and chivalrous bachelor. When real relationships didn't fit the image, the studio either rewrote the story or paid for it to disappear. But it wasn't just his background that got a rewrite. Tyrone Power's on-screen persona as the elegant swashbuckler or sensitive artist was carefully rehearsed, right down to posture and accent. Coaches worked with him to smooth out any rough edges, and his wardrobe was so meticulously selected that even his shoes were custom-made to enhance his height and posture. Directors recalled that off-set, Power was far more introverted than his role suggested, sometimes brooding about whether he could ever live up to the myth swirling around him. What audiences adored was a masterpiece of Hollywood collaboration, a manufactured prince, forever frozen in black and white glory. The real Tyrone Power, still searching for himself behind all that smoke and mirrors. Debbie Reynolds. You'd never guess that MGM's bubbly, ever-smiling Debbie Reynolds didn't spring fully formed from a soda fountain. In reality, her image as America's sweetheart was manufactured as deliberately as a Barbie doll. Born Mary Frances Reynolds in El Paso, Texas, Debbie's real-life childhood was anything but glamorous. Think hand-me-downs, not high society. Yet when MGM got hold of her, they saw a gold mine in her natural energy and set out to sculpt a persona so wholesome you could sell it to grandma. MGM's transformation began with finishing schools, diction lessons, and endless etiquette classes. Debbie had to lose her Texas twang, master high heels, and learn to glide across a room with perfect posture. Studio handlers even mapped out her spontaneous laugh and coached her on how to deflect racy questions in interviews. Everything about her public image, her girl-next-door wardrobe, her upbeat one-liners, her gee-whiz attitude, was rehearsed and approved by a committee of handlers. Her social life was equally managed. Any sign of a crush or a night out was either squashed or spun as good, clean fun. When rumors about her marriage to Eddie Fisher started flying, MGM orchestrated carefully staged photo ops to keep the dream intact. Off-camera, Reynolds was as ambitious and shrewd as any mogul. She once joked, "I was a princess in front of the camera and a boot camp recruit behind it." The joke was on us. The sweetheart was as much a construction as any Hollywood set, a character written to please, performed to perfection, and bought hook, line, and sinker by the American public. Jane Russell. Jane Russell's rise is the stuff of Hollywood legend, and also a cautionary tale about what happens when one eccentric billionaire gets to invent a star from scratch. Russell wasn't just discovered, she was engineered, starting with Howard Hughes's notorious obsession with curves. Cast as the lead in The Outlaw, she was fitted for a custom-designed, gravity-defying bra which, rumor has it, she barely used because it was so uncomfortable, and then launched on an unprecedented publicity campaign. Hughes turned Russell's figure into a national conversation. Billboards, magazine covers, and staged photos revolved around her dangerous curves. Her film debut was delayed for years by censors and controversy, partly because of the revealing ads, partly because Hughes kept tweaking the legend. Even Russell's sultry persona was manufactured. Her natural personality was earthy and down-to-earth, fond of cracking jokes and rolling her eyes at all the fuss. Studio publicists crafted stories of wild nights and spicy escapades, framing Jane as the ultimate femme fatale. But in reality, she was deeply religious, uncomfortable with Hollywood excess, and more likely to spend her weekends volunteering than partying. Co-stars remembered her as practical, even tomboyish, a far cry from the sex symbol image Hughes projected. Russell's career became a balancing act, living up to a fantasy created by others while fighting to be seen as more than a billboard come to life. The result? A legacy built on invention, proof that sometimes the most unforgettable stars are the ones who never quite fit their own hype. 18. Clifton Webb. Clifton Webb's reputation as Hollywood's most sophisticated snob was so ironclad, even his friends sometimes forgot he wasn't actually British royalty. Webb, born in Indianapolis as Webb Parmalee Hollenbeck, had no pedigree, no silver spoon, just a mother determined to make him a star and a talent for reinvention. Every detail of his persona, from his clipped accent to his aristocratic posture, was meticulously constructed. Webb's transformation began early, with dialect lessons to scrub any trace of Indiana from his speech. He became obsessed with manners, etiquette, and the trappings of upper-class life, studying how real aristocrats dined, dressed, and dismissed lesser mortals with a glance. Studio bios claimed he attended exclusive prep schools and moved into high society circles. In truth, his education was piecemeal, and his society connections were usually photo ops arranged by Fox publicists. His roles in films like Laura and Sitting Pretty sealed the deal. Off-screen, Webb kept up the act, lecturing castmates on fine wines and French art, sometimes getting the facts hilariously wrong, but never letting anyone question his authority. His aristocrat persona was so convincing that journalists sometimes quoted his made-up backstories as fact. Clifton Webb proved that, with enough rehearsal, anyone can become Hollywood royalty. No noble blood required. The only real secret ingredient? Relentless dedication to the performance, on-screen and off. 19th, George Sanders. If there's a Hall of Fame for cinematic cads, George Sanders holds a permanent seat. With his purring voice and air of world-weary cynicism, Sanders convinced audiences he was the most erudite, sophisticated villain ever to plot against a hero. But Sanders's real genius was for self-invention, a lifelong act that blurred the line between man and myth. Born in Russia to British parents, Sanders' backstory was as elastic as his accent. Studios embroidered his biography, claiming he'd been educated at elite universities, spoke half a dozen languages, and consorted with European nobility. In truth, Sanders was self-taught, never finished a degree, and learned just enough French and Italian to bluff his way through interviews. When a Fox publicist once pressed him for details, Sanders famously said, "Make something up that sounds impressive. The details don't matter." He played the role off-screen too, correcting others' pronunciation, trading on his faux aristocratic bearing, and delivering interviews full of sly, knowing winks. Co-stars recalled him as equal parts performer and prankster, able to summon a baronial sneer at will. For Sanders, being George Sanders was the ultimate part, and Hollywood, ever hungry for a clever villain, was happy to believe every word. Sanders' legend endures not because it was true, but because he played it to the hilt. The real man remains a riddle wrapped in a Savile Row suit, forever on the edge of truth and performance. So next time you marvel at a Hollywood legend, remember, behind every dazzling star, there's a team of magicians shaping the myth. These 19 icons were more invention than reality, living proof that in Tinseltown, the greatest trick is the star itself. Which studio creation blew your mind? Drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe for more secrets from classic Hollywood. Because here, even legends are sometimes just the best performance in the room.